The terrible incident of the Egel Hazav had the potential to completely, God forbid, wreck the Jewish nation, but through Moshe's intervention, it turned out the exact opposite, that Hashem not only gave us an opportunity to reconnect, but for teshuvah, and the kind of teshuvah that would put us into a better place than we were beforehand. Not only us, but even the protagonists, the Erev Rav themselves, the rabble rousers were also elevated, as we're about to learn in this fascinating sikha, which defines for us what is so powerful about Torah and its ability to transform the world. But commenting on the pasuk, it says, Hashem said to Moshe, go up from here, you and the nation that you have taken out of Mitzrayim. Rashi explains in his second comment on the pasuk, look, it says over here, you and the nation. This is the first time in the conversation, actually not the first time, but it's important to know that in the context of the story of the Egel Hazav, Hashem is no longer referring to them as your nation, as if Moshe, it's your fault. So B'Pashtus, it would appear that what's happening here is that Pirush Rashi zebo behemshech lePirush Hasheni shebedibra maschil hakoidim. It would appear that what Rashi is saying here is a direct continuation from what he started to explain in the preceding commentary. What was the preceding commentary? Leich alei mizeh, where he comments on the words that you should go up from here. Why go up? Says Rashi, because at the time that the Eibishter was angry about the Egel Hazav, he told Moshe, go down, not just off the mountain, but off your spiritual level. So now that Hashem is pleased with the people, he reverses that and says, go up. So it would appear that now Rashi continues that conversation by saying, the fact that the Eibishter says to Moshe to lift himself up is in a sense solving and healing the previous statement to Moshe, go down from your spiritual greatness. So it would appear now that Rashi is picking up that theme and saying, the Eibishter said the same thing to the Jewish people. In response, or to neutralize what Hashem had previously said, where he said to Moshe Rabbeinu, go down from your spirituality because your people are the ones who have sinned, those people that you took out of Mitzrayim, which is not a very complimentary term to use referring to the Yidden. As Rashi immediately said over there, it says your nation were corrupted. Rashi says it doesn't say the nation was corrupted, it says your nation was corrupted, which Rashi interprets to mean Erev Rav shekibalta mi'atzmecha. It's the Erev Rav that you, Moshe, of your own volition decided to incorporate into the Jewish community. Heim shichsu v'shchisu. They're the ones who corrupted themselves and corrupted others to serve the Egel Hazav. So in response to that, where they were seen as arm's length, your people, not mine. Now the Eibishter says, Moshe, you will resume your greatness. Not just you, but the whole nation will now be considered my nation, and not your nation, as if the Eibishter kind of washes his hands of them. Now, if that is the case, then we need to understand, because it would make sense in the previous pasuk, which was addressing the Erev Rav, which are the ones who corrupted everybody. Then, so we get it, we understand why. Over there, Rashi had a qualifier. It's not the whole nation who were corrupted. It's Amcha, the people that Moshe took on board. They're the bad guys. Because that would be the first time that we realize that there's a distinction between the nation, referring to all Jews, and the corrupted nation, referring to your Jews, who you incorporated into the nation. That would have made sense that we get why Rashi had explained it there. But once you're further down the line and you arrive at our pasuk, which is talking about the fact that now they're permitted to continue their journey and to go towards Eretz Yisrael, where Hashem says, go up to the land I promised you. Surely it's logical to us that the Eibishter is now addressing all the Jews, so the entire nation should go to Eretz Yisrael. So why would you even expect the pasuk to say only the Erev Rav? They're the ones going up to Israel. And then Rashi would have to say, you see that? It could have said only Amcha, and instead it says Ha'am. Why would we even think it should say Amcha? Surely Hashem wants the entire Jewish nation to go up to Eretz Yisrael. Or on the other hand, If there is some logical overriding reason why we would think that the entire Jewish community should be called Amcha, specifically Moshe's people, which would have been the logical reason to call them Amcha in this context. And then it would be surprising, wow, usually the people should be called your people, and here they're called their people, and that's why Rashi's pointing it out. So then, Rashi could have said it 2 psukim earlier, where the pasuk says, Hashem tells Moshe, go guide the people to the direction that I told you to take them. 2 psukim earlier, and that's the point. If normally we would expect the word to be Amcha, and it's not, it's Ha'am, that's where you would have expected Rashi to say, look at that, it's not Amcha, it's Ha'am. Okay, so really what we need to understand is, why is it relevant over here that the entire Jewish nation, which is how we're reading it, is called Ha'am, not surprising, instead of Amcha, which we wouldn't have expected. Unless, of course, we're misunderstanding what Rashi is telling us. So the explanation is, and actually Rashi wanted to answer another issue in this pasuk that doesn't seem to make sense. Because we understand why the pasuk needed to use the expression of Moshe being elevated, because we know that the Eibusha told him that he had to descend after the Egel Azav, and we haven't yet seen a reversal. So this would be the reversal. We understand. Here's where the Eibusha tells him, okay, Moshe, you're reinstated to your full spiritual status. But if I'm looking at the Jewish people as a whole, if 2 psukim earlier, the Eibusha already green-lighted Moshe to keep the Yidden going on their journey, so we already know that they've also now been relieved of their censure. So what's this pasuk telling us that we don't already know? Go up there, but you already told me 2 psukim ago. Take the people on their way. Not only is it additional and apparently superfluous information, but this is a whole new statement that Hashem makes. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leichale gomer. If there's a new Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, that implies that it's a new statement. That means that it's like different information to what he said about leich nechei, go guide the people. And in between the 2 statements, there's an aside where the Torah tells us that certain of the nation were struck and punished for having served their Egel Azov. It seems like we have 2 completely different conversations here. Leich nechei es ha'am, go guide the people on their direction to Eretz Yisrael. And leich aleim is a separately different dibur after another story. Why? That's what's bothering Rashi. Therefore, Rashi immediately identifies that these 2 psukim are actually addressing 2 completely different groups of people with 2 different messages. When Hashem tells Moshe, go guide the people on their way, that's talking about people who are biologically Jewish. Those who participated in the Egel Azov, they were already removed. So this is now the people who survived. Whereas when you reach our pasuk, after those who were the perpetrators of the Egel were punished, so there is some retribution against the Avodah Zarah. Now we get new information that's actually surprising information, which is why it is separated into its own statement. Go up to Eretz Yisrael with the people. Now this time the koi rak be'erev Rav. This time the pasuk is addressing Moshe to take the Erev Rav on the route to Eretz Yisrael. Because they need their own instruction. They actually deserve to come along for the ride after what they've just done, and they need their own special procedure of fixing their involvement in the Egel Azav, as we'll learn. It'll come on Sifei a little later. That will also explain why this pasuk is dafka where Hashem says, "Take the nation that you took out of Mitzrayim." Not that the Eibishter chose to take out, but you, Moshe, chose to take out, because that matches up to our earlier reference to the Erev Rav when Hashem said, "Your people that you took out of Mitzrayim, i.e., the Erev Rav, they're the corrupted people." As Rashi said then, those are the mixed multitude that you, Moshe, elected to take with you. That endorses our understanding that here, when it says Asher Elisam Eretz Mitzrayim, we're talking about who? The Erev Rav, and this is a special instruction that they should be included in the journey to Eretz Yisrael, and we need to understand what's the message in that. And the plot thickens before we do that. Now, if we want to understand the difference between the general Jewish population and the Erev Rav population and how they were dealt with after the Egel Azav, we'll see that there are three categories, and it's quite odd that it almost appears that there's a certain leniency for the Erev Rav, which you wouldn't have expected. So Rashi Pirush Kfar Li'il, Rashi already explained earlier. Sholosh misis nidono sham. When he says, when Moshe tells them to give everybody water, etc. So Rashi, it's grind up the Egel Azav and put it into the water and drink it. So Rashi says there were three classes of death for the perpetrators of the Egel Azav. Anybody who had been warned not to participate and yet went ahead in front of Edom, they were killed with a sword, in other words, decapitated. Those people who there were witnesses to see that they served Avodah Zarah, but they were not warned in time or in the appropriate fashion, so they died in some kind of an epidemic. And those who there were no witnesses and nobody knew that they were involved, they would drink the concoction and it would do the same thing to them as what you see for a soita. They'd bloat up or they'd collapse and then they'd die. Now here's what's really interesting. There are three categories, and read the words in the psukim and you'll see certain things stand out in a very conspicuous way. B'sayef, those who are going to be put through execution, it says there were a certain amount of people from the nation who were killed. Generic, the nation. Those who died through the epidemic. Generic, Hashem smote the nation. But those who had the unique reaction to the concoction of the dust of the Egel Azav together with the water, and that their organs collapsed, there the Torah says specifically, children of Israel are the ones who got that water. So what's the difference? The simplistic difference between generically the nation and Bnei Yisrael is when you say the word nation, it is as broad a definition as you could have. Gam hagerim chuli, including also those who had converted and joined the Jewish people later on. But when you contrast the word against Bnei Yisrael, now you're saying Bnei Yisrael, you're making a statement. Mashmoi bnei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, you're implying people who are the actual descendants of our avos. In fact, we see exactly this principle illustrated in the description of how the Yidden left Mitzrayim, because there it says that there were approximately 600,000 adult men who left Bnei Yisrael, who left Mitzrayim, and then independently Vigam Erev Rav Ola Itam. In addition to that was an Erev Rav. Which indicates that the Erev Rav are not part of the 600,000 people who are called Bnei Yisrael. So we have two classes of people. Ha'am, the generic nation that includes everybody. Bnei Yisrael, in contrast, is used as a term to specify only those people who are biologically Jewish. Which immediately draws our attention to the most incredibly surprising information. When you read that the pasuk is Moshe telling the Levim to take this water with the dust of the Egel Azav and only give it to drink to the Bnei Yisrael, that implies that anybody who was from the Erev Rav was not given the concoction to drink, which means surprise! Those members of the Erev Rav who were not caught, there actually was not physical witnessing of their Avera, and nobody warned them, they get off scot-free. They don't die. They don't drink the concoction. And so therefore, what about the fact that Hashem says those who sinned, they will be punished. They'll be erased. They're not going to be killed there and then. And over Yom Pokti for Kati K'mayetza so it's similar to actually to what the Eibishter said about the Yidden, that there'll be times in the future I'll recall the Avera when you sin again in the future, and then I'll mete out the retribution. Because actually Moshe had petitioned on behalf of not only the Jews but the Erev Rav as well, and the Eibishter accepted his petition. So isn't that incredibly surprising? Jewish people were more likely, or had a broader possibility of being punished and dying for the Egel Azav than Erev Rav. The Erev Rav have a loophole. If there's no actual physical testimony, there's no actual evidence, they get off scot-free. Why? So Rashi explains why they didn't give this water to the Erev Rav to drink. A little bit when we get to that pasuk that describes how the Levium gave everybody water to drink, Rashi explains of and you put that together with what Rashi says a little bit later, you get the picture of why the Erev Rav did not drink this water. First thing that Rashi tells us is why were they given this water concoction to drink? So Rashi says it's the same procedure that we use to test a woman who is potentially unfaithful to her husband, the soita woman, same thing of unfaithfulness to God. But then he takes it further. Why is a soita an appropriate metaphor for this particular scenario? So that's moving Pirush Rashi Behemshach Parsha that we'll pick up a little bit later in the Parsha where Rashi tells us this. Commenting on the pasuk where Hashem tells Moshe to make the second luchos, Pirush Rashi says something interesting, basically about why Moshe Rabbeinu smashed the first luchos. Moshe Lamelech Ulu v'niach harusosim hashvachas chulei kach hamelech ze HaKadosh Baruch Hu hashvachas hele erev rav hashuv ze Moshe harusosim shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. So he gives a mashal that there was a king who had to travel away, and he left his fiancée living together with the other shvachos, the other maidservants. Now, the maidservants got up to immoral behavior, and that smeared the name of the fiancé. Now, the shushbin, that's the, so to speak, the what do you call it, the proxy, the person responsible to look after the fiancé, he rips up the ksuva, so when the king comes back and he's all upset, there's no real allegations of misbehavior because they weren't officially actually engaged to each other. So the same thing, Moshe Rabbeinu smashes the luchos. Who are the shvachos? Who are the immoral sidebar people? The Erev Rav. And the Jews are the fiancé. So in other words, Rashi is telling us that the nature of the Egel Hazav would reflect the nature of an unfaithful fiancé. And therefore he wanted to have a procedure to test who, in fact, had been unfaithful, like you would test a soita. Bear in mind, of course, in halacha, fiancé is not the same as it is over here. Our erusin is actually quite binding, and so it would technically be an act of unfaithfulness. Likewise, the Jews had bound themselves in a deal with Hashem that they were absolutely committed to Hashem and not have idols, and so therefore they deserve to be tested like soitos. Now, once you read that in Rashi, then it's self-evident why you don't give any of that water to the Erev Rav. In the story, the Erev Rav are the immoral maidservants. They're not in a relationship with Hashem, in a formal relationship with Hashem. So how do you test them like you test a soita? A soita is only relevant where there's a marriage relationship between two people. They don't have that relationship with Hashem. So therefore, technically, they dodge that bullet of being tested with the soita water. But the truth of the matter is, there's got to be more to the story, and we'll get there. Before we do, so now we could start to understand why there's a second pasuk that says, take the people upwards to Eretz Yisrael, in addition to the fact that 2 psukim earlier, Hashem already said, go guide the people towards the place that I have made your destination. Because the first time Hashem says to Moshe, go guide the people on their journey to Eretz Yisrael, who's he talking about? Innocent Jews who never got caught up in the Egel Azov, which was the vast majority of people. Because the small minority who did succumb to this temptation of Avodah Zarah, those Jews had already died at this point. The only reason that they are guilty by association is because they did not protest the Avodah Zarah. So that's why they needed some element of teshuvah. So the first address is to the people we expect to go to Eretz Yisrael because they're not really caught up in the sin of the Egel HaZahav. But the pasuk that says, not Leich Nechei, Leich Alei. So, so now Hashem's telling Moshe something brand new and surprising. That even though there are certain members from the Erev Rav who were involved in the Egel HaZahav, but we just can't prove it. The only reason they're alive is because we couldn't find witnesses to implicate them. Even they now have the opportunity to go to Eretz Yisrael, and not only that, it's going to be an aliyah for them. And we need to understand why. So where do you see an aliyah for these people? Rashi points it out immediately. I see an upgrade for these people immediately. This is the time where we're seeing they're no longer addressed as your people. Which implies that they must have done tshuva. That's a key part of the story. They're not getting a free ride. They must have done tshuva for their participation. And therefore it is no longer appropriate to call them just your people, like kind of the sidelines of the Jewish community, but they've actually come around and they are now dedicated, and so they become part of the nation. Now, once we understand what's going on over here, that we're talking about this coming back from having been, they were involved in the Egel HaZahav, and now they pulled away from it and they did tshuva, will help us understand one word in the pasuk that does seem to be unnecessary. That would explain why here the pasuk says, more than besides what we said in the preceding pasuk, which is go guide the people to the place that I have directed them. But here it says leich alei mizeh, take them up from here. Why is there suddenly the emphasis from here? Atav v'ha'am, you and the people. The pasuk should have just said leich alei atav v'ha'am gomer. You get up, you and the people go up. Why mizeh? Why do we have to know where you are leaving from? But that's exactly what the Torah wants us to know. This aliyah, this elevation of this side group of people, Erev Rav, who served Avodah Zarah, but now want to do teshuvah for it, their aliyah is mizeh. It starts from working away from here. In other words, they have to be willing to move away from and therefore be elevated from the Egel HaZahav. That's something that will impact Moshe himself, whose entire greatness hinges on the greatness of the Jewish people. So if there's a tag-along element of the Jewish community that's not where they should be, that would affect Moshe Rabbeinu. So once they move away from the Avodah Zarah, Moshe Rabbeinu is elevated. And of course it affects the actual people who are perpetrators themselves, that they should be elevated through their teshuvah. But those members of the Jewish community about whom the pasuk says, go, Moshe, guide them back to Eretz Yisrael. Those are Jews who never served the Egel in the first place. So we don't have to say, Leich nechei mizeh. Go take them from here, because there is no here. They were never invested in the Egel HaZahav in the first place. So we've got an incredible picture of here that we would never have noticed, that those members of the Erev Rav who were not caught red-handed are given an opportunity for teshuvah. They take that opportunity, and therefore they're elevated, included into the nation, and taken on the journey to Eretz Yisrael. And it sounds beautiful, but it leaves us with a very badly niggling question. After all this information, where we've explained how Rashi's commentary works and how the words of the psukim work, and it all makes a lot of sense, still not clear. How is it possible that dafka members of the Erev Rav, they were the core of this whole problem. They were the ones who were directly involved and seduced other people to be involved in the Egel Azav. And yet, they were not all judged to die. Some of them escaped a fate that even regular Jews had. And not only are they told to go on their way to Eretz Yisrael, but we dafka say that it should be an aliyah for them. What did they do to deserve so much compassion and so much inclusion? So the first step of understanding that is to understand what happens when Moshe takes on a project. Back to Maimon Chazal, Shamishkan Unitzchi. We know that Chazal tell us that the Mishkan was an eternal structure. It would never disappear. It might be hidden somewhere, but it will never be destroyed. Why? Says the Medrash, because anything that Moshe produced would be eternal. Now, if you look at the context, the materials for the Mishkan were not from Moshe, they were from the whole community. The actual planning and structure of the Mishkan was by Betzalel and his team. Yet Moshe is physically the one who erected the Mishkan. And also, of course, the directions of how the Mishkan should be made were all directed by Moshe. So he has a pivotal role to play in making the Mishkan. And it lasts forever now because Moshe had an involvement in it. How much more so then? Those members of the Erev Rav that, as Rashi tells us, you, Hashem says to Moshe, you chose them, you converted them. In other words, they are these are people whose spirituality is formed by Moshe. They must be eternal. If the Mishkan structure is eternal because Moshe was involved in it, how much more so the permanent value of these people as part of the Jewish community must be thanks to Moshe's input. Moshe touches them, they cannot just simply disappear. Now we need to understand still, how could this work? How is it fair? Why is it important? And as we'll discover, how this really expresses what Torah is truly about. From a perspective of Chassidus, Shleimus tikkun hachet ha'egel ba lidei bite bekach sheha'erev rav loy ne'evad ki im nistakem v'nis'aleh kidelekamon. The ultimate recovery from the Egel Hazav, the ultimate teshuvah, is not the destruction of the perpetrators, but the conversion and elevation of those perpetrators. V'yuvan, in order to understand that, let's have a look. Bahaktam divrei Chazal and Gelech Egel, famous statement of the Gemara Avodah Zarah about the Jewish people. Shelo Yisrael re'uyin lo'oisei ma'aseh. That the truth is the Jewish people were not really susceptible to the Egel Hazav. It should never have happened. So how did it happen? Says the Gemara Egel, Gzeiras Melech Hoysa, Gedelitin Pisrim Pele Bali Tshuva. The whole thing was choreographed by Hashem that the Jews should have a temporary lapse, get sucked into the Egel Hazav, and recover from it, and that would open a pathway for all future Bali Tshuva, or as we'll see in a moment, not only future Bali Tshuva. It would open a path for Tshuva. Chassidus explains, when we say that this is to open a path, to open the mouth of the Baal Tshuva, seeing what happened to Egel Hazav, to say I could also do tshuva, that's not simply referring to Balei Tshuva in the future, that if down the line, somewhere down the line, there's a person who has this terrible Avera that they've done, they could say, well, there's a recovery from the Egel Hazav, there could be recovery from my Avera. It's not only that. Chassidus explains the whole point was to take the Yidden at that time in history and allow them the opportunity to reach the incredible status that tshuva allows a person. We know very well that tshuva is not a path that a person could plan for or choose. Adarabah, to the opposite, as the Gemara tells us in Yuma, any person who says, I will sin now with a plan later to do tshuva, they won't give you the opportunity to do tshuva. It's only if a person slipped and fell and landed up in a bad space, then that creates an opportunity and a responsibility to do tshuva. So tshuva you don't ask for, and yet tshuva has some major advantage over the service of tzaddikim. As the well-known statement from the Medrash, even the Rambam brings it, that the level of a Baal Tshuva is a level that a tzaddik cannot reach. So therefore, because the Baal Tshuva can't choose to do the Aveira, to have the opportunity for Tshuva, yet Tshuva will take them to such an elevated position, therefore, the Eibishter in his great kindness, to facilitate an opportunity for the Yidden standing there at the time of Matan Torah to reach the greatness of Tshuva. They were not people who were susceptible to Averis. They had absolute self-control. They had mastery over the Yetzer Hara. So there had to be some strange, inexplicable decree coming from the king himself to allow the Yetzer Hara temporary control of these people, so that they could do the Egel Azov, not because the Egel Azov is valuable, but because the tshuva that follows is invaluable. So now, so now we're saying that the Baal Tshuva reaches a point that is greater than the tzaddik. Why? How? Let's understand at least one perspective on it. Because Teshuvah allows us the opportunity to extract and elevate holy sparks that were entrapped in absolute impurity. The three impure klippas. A person who lives a straight, upright life, tzaddik, such a tzaddik has the opportunity to engage and uplift sparks of holiness that are within the normal parts of this world. In other words, kosher food, kosher business activities. They could find the holiness in that. But their entire attitude towards anything which is prohibited by Torah is keep it away at all costs. And therefore, so they will never have the opportunity to transform something which is forbidden into something which has a value of holiness. Whereas on the other hand, the Baal Tshuva, when a Baal Tshuva does true Tshuva, they effect such a powerful turnaround that what was previously counted and considered like a wanton rebellion against Hashem is now considered an absolute merit, a feather in their hat. In other words, not only does the Baal Tshuva neutralize what was negative, achieve something far greater. The Baal Tshuva is able to elevate these holy sparks that have been stuck inside the world of Averis to the point that they now become holy. That's a big difference. So this difference between the tzaddik and Baal Tshuva, that only a Baal Tshuva can step into the world of impurity and extract holiness out of it. It's not only because the tzaddik never goes there, so the tzaddik never has averis, the tzaddik doesn't have these materials to work with. It actually talks to a far bigger issue, the overall difference between how a tzaddik approaches their service of Hashem versus how a Baal Tshuva does. To understand that, we have to ask the question, we know that Hashem is absolutely one, but what does that mean? And it depends if you're looking from the tzaddik's or the Baal Tshuva's perspective. From the perspective of the fact that the Eibishter is absolutely the only thing that exists. So then, it would be impossible to say that there's any place, any reality, anything in the world where Hashem's absolute oneness cannot affect or reach. Like the Gemara tells us in Chulin, there's nothing else besides Hashem. Even when there are things which appear to be contrary to Hashem, like witchcraft, things that seem to reject the godly reality. Even there you could see Achdus Hashem. It's just that there are two sides to this Achdus. One perspective, Aleph. One possible reason why negative things or evil should not contradict Hashem's reality is simply because it doesn't really exist. It's darkness, absence of light, absence of good. It doesn't have real vitality. Where do you see that in practice? When a person takes an approach of avodas Hashem, which is push it away, disregard the negative, don't get involved, it doesn't come in onto our radar, like a tzaddik. Or alternatively, Beis, the alternative is that we know that every single thing that exists because there's a spark of Hashem inside of it that keeps it alive. And so when you have something which is completely contrary to godliness, but then you radiate the nitzuz of Elokus inside of it to the point that it shines, then it stops to be negative. Even though previously, even the spark inside of it had been so dimmed that the spark itself looks like perhaps it's not there and everything is completely negative. Because ultimately, why did Hashem create negative, darkness, toxic energies? The fact that Eibishter created is why there's a spark of holiness in it. Why is it there? Why does it exist? The entire intention was that the negative should recognize its internal divine spark and be converted to positive. That is achieved through tshuva. It's in that world of teshuva that you transform and convert the negative to positive, the sin to credit, the darkness to light. Now, these two perspectives actually align with the perspective of if it's the Eibishter looking at the world or if it's the world looking at the Eibishter within the world. So mitzad achdus Hashem kefishin ergeshes boilam, when it's the world looking at the Eibishter as the Eibishter is in this world, which basically is a perspective that says we exist as a world, but we're connected and one with Hashem. If you're looking in the framework and perimeters of the world, the negative exists, it has power, and it obstructs godliness. So how do you reveal godliness in that setting? You have to push aside the negative, and that way you can allow Hashem to shine. Because then you say, you see what you thought was such a powerful opposition to Hashem actually is nothing. It's completely empty. It's smoke and mirrors. That's us. We have to, in our world, we have to say it's actually nothing so we can recognize Achdus Hashem. But if you're looking from the Eibishter's perspective, from the Eibishter's perspective, nothing exists based on how it appears. Everything exists based on what it is intended for. So what is the negative intended for? How does it exist? Because there's godliness within it. So if you live in the Eibishter's perspective, which includes the perspective of the spark of generating energy, divine energy, inside the physical opposing energy, the opposing element, inside itself, it knows I only exist in order to serve Hashem. I exist so that there should be teshuvah. That is this amazing distinction between the perspective of the tzaddik and of the Baal Tshuva. By and large, the way that tzaddik engages the world is to bring holiness into the world. To draw down godliness that should fill the world as the world is. And so when it comes to tackling the negative, so the tzaddik's responsibility is to say, from a worldly perspective, how am I supposed to see negative and therefore recognize Hashem? Well, the world presents the negative as things which oppose or distort godliness. So how do I deal with that? I've got to push it aside and say, it's nothing. Let's bring it a kus. Let's create consciousness of Hashem. And all the distractions, we have to keep telling ourselves, it is nothing, has no power. The Baal Tshuva's mode of serving Hashem is the exact opposite. Lifting things out of the swamps. Leaving the reality of the world. So, because they're looking to get above, to get past, to break free of the world, they're actually looking at the world more from Hashem's perspective. Again, the tzaddik wants to bring a likus into the world, so the tzaddik has to consider how the world sees things. The Baal Tshuva is trying to break away from the world, so the Baal Tshuva has to see how the Eibishter sees things. So when the Baal Tshuva looks at the negative, what does the Baal Tshuva see? The Baal Tshuva sees in the negative its purpose. Why did Hashem create negative? That it's to illustrate that within the negative there is godly energy, Hashem's vitalizing words that are connected to Hashem himself. So their whole objective is get hold of that holiness and bring it to connect to Hashem again. This will also help us understand a very weird medrash, or strange sounding medrash, I should say, where it says that the reason out of all things that they decided to fashion it was dafka a calf was because at the time of Matan Torah they had this insight into what happens in the higher realms, and they saw the face of an ox, which is part of the divine chariot. That has to be one of the strangest things to say. Yes, we acknowledge that the reason the Chet HaEgel happened was it was orchestrated by Hashem. But how could it be that what facilitated the Egel Azav and the design of this idol should dafka be something that they saw? Where? In the Eibishter's Merkava. And when? At the time of Matan Torah, that should precipitate something so negative. How's that possible? But now that we understand that the entire purpose of the Egel Azav and the whole process was something the Jews didn't really have a relationship with, but the Eibishter orchestrated it so that they could do tshuva davar move, and now we understand because the tshuva post the Egel Azav is actually part of the story of Matan Torah. Meaning to say, the story of Matan Torah is a story in two parts. Be'ez Matan Torah, at the time of the actual revelation at Sinai, the Eibishter revealed how things are from his perspective, revealing Hashem from above and, so to speak, overwhelming the world. In order that should absorb into and have a meaningful impact on the world as the world is, into the world of witchcraft, the realm of absolute impurity, that the Eibishter created by facilitating an unusual temptation and allowing them to do teshuvah because of it. So in other words, what are we talking about over here? Reaching into the darkest, deepest, worst part of spiritual energy and elevating the sparks therein. Which is achieved through doing tshuva for the Chet HaEgel. Tshuva is most highlighted by the fact that there were members of the Erev Rav who were directly involved in causing this debacle, and they survived and did tshuva. The Erev Rav are the worst people. They're the seducers. They're the ones who drew the Jews into this. They fall into the category of people that the Torah tells us you may not look for excuses to defend them. They come from the world of absolute toxic energy. They have nothing positive. So if those people get to do teshuvah, that is the ultimate transformation of darkness into light, the ultimate transformation of zedonos into zochios, the whole theory and principle of teshuvah. They lived what teshuvah is. And that's the deeper Chassidish explanation of what Hashem tells Moshe, go up with these people. You and the Erev Rab that you took out of Mitzrayim. Previously we said the aliyah is to get away from Zeh, to get away, get away from the Egel Azav. Now we're translating, it's aliyah sheba ketoitza mechet ha'egel. The aliyah is mizeh, it's because of this, because of the Egel Azav, that's why there is aliyah. And that is evidence. How do we know we've gone from here, from the Egel Azov, to absolute Tshuva and Kedusha? Because look, the people who were Amcha are now Ha'am. They've been completely incorporated into the nation. And this will also tie into the Haftarah, not of this week's parasha, but it will tie into the Haftarah of this week's parasha. Haftarah say minyona shel parasha because the Haftarahs always reflect the themes of the parasha. Valkenes anakuda amur moitzim on gam Haftarah's parashas Tisa. So we're going to see that nakuda in the Haftarah as well. B'siproi des Eliyahu b'Har HaKarmel, in the story of Eliyahu challenging the Nevi'ei Habal on Har HaKarmel. What was the challenge? They said Baal is the one to worship. And Eliyahu said, well, if that's the case, let's see if you get this miraculous fire to consume the carbon that you're going to bring. So Amar Chazal. So Chazal comment on that story and tell us that the bull that was being taken to be shechted for the Baal service to kind of try and prove their point, it didn't want to go. So the Medrash tells us from Eliyahu, the bull communicated to Eliyahu, that other bull that you, Eliyahu, are going to bring as a korban, that's going to belong to Hashem. It's going to be elevated. And Abish's name will be sanctified through that bull. Me, I'm going up on the other altar. I'm going to anger Hashem by being part of idolatry. Eliyahu answers, Keshem sheshmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu miskadesh al yad zeh she'imi, kach miskadesh al yodcha. In the same way as the Abish's name will be sanctified by my bull that I will bring, will be equally sanctified by you. Now, the simplest understanding is just like Eliyahu, there was a great miracle of fire came down from the sky and consumed the bull that he had brought as a korban, which obviously corroborated clearly Eliyahu's nevuah and the fact that the Eibishter is the true God. The truth is that part of that story is the bull that was taken up by the Baal prophets. It also sanctified Hashem's name by the fact that nothing occurred when they called out to Baal to ignite the altar. Because that showed, look, these guys are false, Eliyahu is true, so it's part of the story. But that's not good enough. Because Meloshan HaMedrash, the way the Medrash says it says, Keshem sheshmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu miskadesh al yidei zeh she'imi, kach miskadesh al yodcha, that in the same way as this bull that I'm bringing will sanctify, so will yours. Mashma then implies that the Kiddush Hashem by both of these bulls was identical. But how's that possible? Kiddush Hashem shalidei apar shaliyahu halidei apar uboy atzmoi. With Eliyahu's korban, it was that actual bull and the process of bringing it as a korban itself that illustrated that illustrated Hashem is true. Whereas the one that was brought on behalf of the other people, the only way that it showed that Hashem is true is by negation. It doesn't illustrate Hashem's truth, it illustrates that Baal is false. So how can you say it's the same? How could Eliyahu say, you will be Mekadosh Shem Shamayim like I will? The explanation is Eliyahu's efforts at that time and his impact on the Jewish people to do teshuvah from having served Baal, that revealed in this world that Hashem is the true God, as they then announced themselves. All the Jews who were present announced. But how did they come to that awareness? Because something came flying down from above. There was this revelation, like at Har Sinai, like the Avodas HaTzadik. There was a great revelation that confirmed that's all nonsense. It has no value. It has no power. So what happened? By doing this, by effecting this miracle, that showed that the Eibishter is in control. The Eibishter is the only one. So therefore, Eliyahu's message to the so-called bull is that you will create as much Kiddush Hashem, but oiso achdus. There'll be as much expression of Hashem's oneness, because you are affecting the Baal Tshuva side of things, which is what? That now everybody realizes that the whole reason that you exist, bull to be brought to Baal, the whole reason you exist is to be able to illustrate that there's a nitzutz elikus even in the bulls of Baal, which is there to effect tshuva, to allow us to see Hashem in this world. Which has a practical lesson for us. Many people opt to focus their entire effort and their entire life on things which are holy. Because they believe as long as you're in the world of Torah and Tefillah, that's how you sanctify Hashem's name. But to get involved with a person who has gone off the rails and is serving or doing Averas, they'll say, look, the Alter Rebbe explains that every single Avera is a miniature version of rejection of Hashem and idolatry. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to speak to those people, engage with those people. I don't want to touch the bull of Avodah Zarah. I don't want to go there. So the lesson to that person is, Eliyahu says, as much as the bull that is totally part of holiness, a korban to Hashem, that sanctifies Hashem's name, equally you can sanctify and will sanctify Hashem's name by the people who are playing on the other side, getting involved with them and arousing them to tshuva. It's dafka that there's a certain expression of Hashem's oneness that you can only achieve when you extract something of value from things which are not only not valuable, not attractive. When you engage with those who need to do tshuva and encourage them to do tshuva, that transforms the negative to positive. That is actually what Hashem wants. Look at how Eliyahu did it. First, he tells them, the Baal people, put your animal on the altar and see if you could bring it as a sacrifice. And only after that did he put his own bull on. Amazing concept. The first step, the primary step of sanctifying Hashem's name actually started with the Baal bull, which was going to speak to the hearts of the people and smash their belief in that system and recognize that the Baal is there actually as a means of arousing tshuva and of connecting to Hashem. And so that's got a lesson for us. This applies to our own avodah. To engage with those Jews who are not connected to their Judaism might come at the expense of some of your time of learning Torah and serving Hashem. Still, you have to know, our goal is to sanctify Hashem's name. That's our goal. That is achieved through the bull that belonged originally to Baal and was part of their process, which means the Why did Eliyahu do that? To teach us that you're supposed to reach out to bring a Jew who's distant from the Yiddishkeit. And that is as valuable, possibly in a sense even more valuable, than how you'll sanctify Hashem's name through your own avodah in a nice, pristine environment. When a person has both approaches, the two dual approaches are told to us in a story of Eliyahu, who is the herald of Geula. So therefore it teaches us that if we have both, not just involvement in our own personal spiritual development, but care and concern for the next person as well, that will bring Mashiach right now.